domestic issues now far outweigh foreign policy issues. In this time of transition, there are no great leaders in the club known as the G7. It's time for new leaders and for new ideas around this world. In the meantime, the shared values of the New World Order have become very clear. Multi-party democracy, freedom of economic choice, free trade, privatization, and prosperity based on the marketplace. There are only a few places now, like Cuba and North Korea, that have not embraced these now almost universal values, but in time they will. And in the New World Order, we're moving toward worldwide free trade. We're moving toward a world where there's free trade among all countries. That's the large overarching trend beneath which we sometimes see counter trends of protectionism, smaller counter trends of protectionism. And the emerging global economy must be understood, I think, not merely as more and more trade among 190 countries, but as a world moving to a single, unitary global economy, one market. And I don't think that we can understand the United States today by just looking at the United States. It can be said, I think, that indeed today there's no such thing as a U.S. economy. So interlaced are we with the rest of the world. And in your line of work, you can no longer assess financial risk just by looking at the United States. 1992 single market Europe is but a step to a single market world. And for a global economy, one marketplace to work, we must eventually have completely free trade among nations, just as we do within nation states themselves. We do not know, no one knows what the imbalance of trade is between Tokyo and Osaka, or between Denver and Dallas, nor will we in time between, say, France and Germany, between nations. And the free trade world is beginning to take shape. The free trade zone between the United States and Canada has been in effect for more than 3 years now. Mexico will be joining, if we can get Canada to approve that, to make up the North American Free Trade Zone. Chile will be the next to join, unless Colombia or Argentina, who are being very aggressive about it, get there first. In the spring of this year, the presidents of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay signed a treaty committing themselves to the formulation of a tariff-free common market by 1994. 5 Central American countries, led by Puerto Rico, have agreed to integrate their economies. An East Asian Economic Caucus was formed late last year, eventually leading to a free trade zone. And a year ago, President Bush invited all of the Americas, from the northern tip of Canada to the southernmost point in South America, to join in a giant free trade zone. And I think that will happen before the 1990s are over. Other regions will form, regions will link with regions in this march to a single market world. It is entirely likely that by the end of the 1990s, there will be a giant triangle of free trade among the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific, and that would be about 80% of the world's economy. The New World Order is a world that is moving toward free trade among all nations. Free trade, but not union. And that is why the European community, viewed from afar, is so schizophrenic. All over the world, countries are agreeing to trade more freely with each other. And all over the world, people are asserting their independence and their sovereignty. Both of these things are happening. And the more democracy, the greater the number of countries in the world. By the next century, we should have well over 300 countries in this world. In Barcelona, there were teams representing 172 countries. For the Olympics in Atlanta in 1996, they are planning on the participation of well over 200 countries. Freddie Heineken, who's the head of Heineken's that bring us that wonderful beer in Holland, has proposed a United States of Europe with 75 countries. each with a population of 5 to 10 million, very manageable size for governance, and each with reference to its ethnic and linguistic history. Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark would stay the same. Scotland and Wales would become independent countries. In Spain, Catalonia and the Basque region would become independent. Switzerland and Italy would be divided into 9 different countries, and so on. Utopian, perhaps, a little hard to see how it would be worked out, but the fact of the matter is, it is much more in the direction the world is going than European Union is. Creating free trade among the 12 EC countries is one thing, and that's on track, and that will happen January 1st, 1993, but Maastricht Treaty is quite another. Denmark sent the first signal, and the close vote in France just prolongs the agony. There will be no union of the EC, certainly not in this form, and probably not in this century. Because the more people are bound together economically, the more they do the human thing of asserting their distinctiveness. And in the world today, we witness strong cultural assertiveness, language assertiveness, and there'll be no common currency in Europe in this century, because one of the things that distinguishes one from another is our coin. It has for centuries. We want to hold on to that. All peoples want to retain their identities, and that's very pertinent to the vote in Canada today. The global trends are free trade agreements and new linguistic, ethnic, and territorial identities and self-determination. Free trade, yes. Union, not just now. Perhaps the thing that most characterizes the New World Order is the spread of democracy and the triumph of market economics. Indeed, I think we can say today that there is simply no alternative to the free market as a way to organize economic life. The number of democratic countries in the world doubled in the 1990s to more than 60. In 1990, for the first time in history, more than 50% of the world's peoples lived in democracies. And at the end of this decade, once the old men of China pass from the scene, the stage will be set for China to join the ranks of democratic countries. And I think that will happen, and at that point, 90% of the world's peoples will live in a democracy. And with this great globalization of democracy, think about this. There has never, ever been a war between two democracies. The language of the New World Order is English, and lucky for us. I mean, of course, us Americans. The worldwide spread of English is remarkable. There simply has never been anything like it in history. The numbers are these. Today, about 330 million people throughout the world speak English as a mother tongue. Now, that's less than half the 750 million people who speak Mandarin Chinese as a mother tongue. But another 400 million people speak English as a second language, and another 350 million have reasonable competence in English as a foreign language. All that adds up to more than 1 billion English speakers. English is the language of international shipping and air travel, as you know. It's become the language of the international youth culture. 85% of all the escalating number of international telephone conversations is in English. And it's certainly the language of science. Today, 2/3 of all scientific papers are initially published in English. It's clear that English is the language of the information age. More than 80% of all the data in the more than 100 million computers in the world today is in English. One of the great appeals of English, of course, is that it is so easy to speak badly. No problem. English is not replacing other languages, it's supplementing them. For example, 1/4 of China's 1.2 billion people is engaged in studying English. Just imagine, there are more people studying English in China than the entire population of the United States, and certainly more that are studying English in the United States. In Paris, there's a company called Alcatel. Surely many of you know it. It's the second largest telecommunications company in the world. It's very French. Its headquarters are in the heart of Paris. And if you call that headquarters, as I did recently, the operator answers in English. Alcatel, good morning. Well, when the French yield on language, you know that something is really afoot. And something is. English will be the language of Single Market Europe 1992. We have to think of English, as we have not, as a strategic asset in the global marketplace. As the New World Order takes form, we are witnessing a global renaissance in the arts, literature, and spirituality. From the United States and Europe to the Pacific Rim, wherever the affluent information economy has spread, the need to re-examine the meaning of life through the arts has followed. The big story of the 1990s will not be high technology. It won't be high technology because we expect technology to continue apace. We expect technology to continue to surprise us. But the big news story will be a renaissance in the arts and literature and spirituality. Now, I know that almost all the talk you hear and the books you read about the dawning of the 21st century have so far focused on high technology, on space travel, lasers, robots, superconductivity, artificial intelligence. I must tell you that artificial intelligence strikes me as an oxymoron. As many of you know, that very old-fashioned word, oxymoron, means a phrase containing two incompatible ideas, like country music. Just kidding. But I think with artificial intelligence, we ought to stick to our more modest designation of expert systems, and we're doing many wonderful things there. In any case, the accelerating pace of technology is tipping our balance. And we seek to regain our balance by re-examining and experiencing our humanity. Science and technology, of course, do not tell us what life means. And we examine and re-examine the nature of our humanity mostly through the arts and literature, and there's an unprecedented interest in the visual arts all over the world today. Look at all the art museums we've opened in the United States in the last decade, more than we have ever in the history of this country. In Germany, over the last decade, they've opened more than 300 art museums, 220 in Japan during the same time. In Great Britain, they're opening art museums at the rate of one every 18 days. Sounds like a lot. In the United States, in the last 2 decades, we've opened a new art museum once every 5 days. There's a similar unprecedented interest in poetry, dance, theater, even in the high art of opera. And appropriately, this is all decentralized. It may interest you to know that today, more Americans go to arts events, and I'm talking about fine arts events, more Americans go to arts events today than to sports contests. And the number of people attending arts events is going up, and the number of people going to sports events and watching it on television is going down. What is happening in this society and in many others is that the arts are replacing sports as the dominant leisure activity of the society. It is not that sports are going away. It's just sports are not growing, and the arts are growing dramatically. But you know, if you step back and you take a longer, wider view, this shift from sports to the arts makes an awful lot of sense. The entertainment of the industrial worker, and they were all men, the entertainment of the industrial worker were the gladiators, as they have been for centuries. In the United States in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the most popular sport by far was boxing. And I remember in the 40s when Joe Louis fought in those great championship fights, the whole country would stop and would listen to it on the radio. Then also in the 40s, we Americans perfected the quintessential industrial sport of American professional football. This time with 22 gladiators out on the field, each a precise part of the football machine, mirroring the industrial age. But now the industrial period is behind us. The workforce has been flooded with women, much more likely to be arts fans than sports fans, though many are both. And we have the highest level of education in our workforce we've ever had. More sophisticated entertainment is required. And it's already happened. Two decades ago in the United States in 1970, we Americans spent twice as much on sports events as we did on arts events. Then the arts started to climb past sports 3 years ago, and today we're spending $2 billion more each year on arts events than on sports contests. And there's a shift in corporate sponsorship. 2 years ago, I was in Amsterdam, a little over 2 years ago, and saw that great Van Gogh show. Never happened again. 300 of his paintings. The primary sponsor for that great international show was an American corporation, Sara Lee. And we'll see a lot more of this happening. Now, having said that, let me caution you not to hold your breath waiting for the guys with the six-packs to shift from Monday night football to the Marriage of Figaro. Can't you see it now? Monday night ballet. Bring out the beer. Well, many more of us will be dealing with the nature of our humanity against the onslaught of technology. A new emphasis on the arts and literature and spirituality, that's part of the context for the 1990s. In the New World Order, we will see a decline in the importance of cities, the decline of cities. The Industrial Revolution, or rather the process of the Industrial Revolution, created the great cities that we have in Europe, in the United States, because with 19th century transportation, you could move goods quite cheaply by railway or canal over very long distances, but it was very expensive to move people, even over short distances, so people lived next to their work. We aggregated people that way, and we created our great industrial cities. Automobiles changed that somewhat, and now electronics have changed it a lot. For the first time in history, the link between a person's place of work and his or her home is being broken. Transportation technology suburbanized America, and now electronics technology is dispersing us further away from our cities to rural areas. We are witnessing, I think, the beginnings of a new phenomenon. In the United States in the 1990s, for the first time in 200 years, more people are moving to rural areas than to urban, many more. There's a spreading and a thinning of the population everywhere. And today, people are moving out of cities for quality of life reasons. 5 years ago, or now almost 6 years ago, I moved out of a big city and I moved to a place called Telluride, Colorado. And those of you who ski know that it's one of the great places on the planet to do that. It's in the southwest corner of Colorado, in the majestic San Juan Range of the Great Rocky Mountains. My little village has only 1,400 people, and my house and my town of Telluride are at 9,000 feet. And it's in a box canyon. Telluride's only 5 streets wide and about 1.5 miles long. And then on 3 sides, the mountains rise to 13 and 14,000 feet. It's an absolutely magnificent place in which to live and to work. And with my computers and telephones and fax machines and FedEx, Federal Express says they'll deliver anything from point A to point B by 10 o'clock the next morning, with certain exceptions, and there's an asterisk. Well, we're one of the asterisks, because we're a little inaccessible up there in the mountains, but it does come the very next day, always, but not until 1 or 2 o'clock, and as is the case with such small places, the same person each day brings around the Federal Express packages. His name's Ed. Everyone calls him Fed Ed. So, with Fed Ed and my computers and telephones and fax machines, I experience being as in touch with the rest of the world as if I were operating out of London or Tokyo or Manhattan. This is being duplicated by hundreds of thousands of times. It's a very big story. It's all over this country, all over Europe. It's even beginning in Japan. It is not to be confused with the scenario of the electronic cottage, where instead of going to the office, you can some days tap out messages, but the office is nearby and handy if you need it. Rather, it's for people who are not location-bound, not location-dependent. And in our new information era, the number of people who are not location-dependent, including almost everyone in this room, is increasing dramatically. I operate globally out of Telluride, as I suggest. I do have an office. In fact, I have an office here in Washington, D.C. I haven't been to my office for a little over 4 years now. Part of my message is you don't have to go to the office anymore. But it might be more instructive to look at my neighbors. There's a company in Telluride called Western Eye Press, and it's just two people, Lito and Linda. Lito's from Uruguay. Lito and Linda and a couple, they have this wonderful publishing company, and they create these marvelous photographic books and guidebooks, and they create them on their computers in Telluride, and they print out the camera-ready pages with a very high-resolution laser printer. They Federal Express these camera-ready pages to Seoul, Korea, where their printer in Seoul manufactures the books and then ships them to distributors that Lito and Linda have lined up over the years. Western Eye Press is a player in the global economy, and it's only two people on a mountain perch in Colorado. You don't have to be a big company to be a player in the global economy. You don't have to be a big country. Look at Singapore. Singapore has 2.7 million people, but yet look at its great economic presence in the world today. When Singapore started Singapore Airlines, it had 1.9 million people. Obviously had to create a marvelous airline to attract other nationals. Today, Singapore Airlines is one of the biggest in the world. It's arguably the most popular in the world, and it's by far the most profitable in the world. You don't have to be a big country or a big company to be a player in the global economy. And let me underscore that as dramatically as I can. The United States is the largest exporter in the world. 50% of U.S. exports are created by companies with 19 or fewer employees. Only 7% of U.S. exports are created by companies with 500 or more employees. And yet we have this mindset that in the great global economy, it's the multinationals and so forth. It's simply not true. I was in Germany a little over 2 years ago, and a professor at a German university there in Munich said that West Germany at the time, the second largest exporter in the world, that the profile, the size of companies was almost exactly the same. Scale and location are becoming meaningless. Space and time are now pretty much out the window. And in many ways, if cities did not exist, it now would not be necessary to invent them. Before I conclude, I want to just make a few comments about our new book. This month, Patricia Aberdeen and I have published a new book called Megatrends for Women. And this is just a little preview, because it's very important, it seems to me, to what you're up to. The thrust of the book talks about how this generation of women, baby boomers are 1/3 of the population of the United States, that the women in that generation is the first generation of women in American history to have lifelong full-time careers. And the oldest of those women are now 35 to 46. They've had a decade or two or half of experience. They are assuming leadership roles all across the board. It's most visible in politics, but in business, in healthcare, in religion, across the board. It is most visible in politics. This year, 108 women won their party's nomination to run for the U.S. House of Representatives. The previous record was only 70. In this country, we have 3 women governors, but on the very next tier, Lieutenant Governor, Treasurer, Secretary of State, 25 out of the 50 states have 1 to 3 women in those slots. We have 3 women in that second tier in my state of Colorado. And we think that by the year 2000, we're very likely to have 15 or 20 women governors, arguably the training ground for the presidency. And we think women will start running for the presidency very soon. So it's more than the year of the woman. It's something very new that's being started. In business in the United States, women-owned businesses, it might surprise you to know, that as of this year, crossover year, women-owned businesses employ more people than all of the Fortune 500 put together. Now and women are creating new businesses at the rate of 3 times what men are. As recently as 1970, women owned only 5% of US businesses. Today it's bumping up against 40%, and by the end of this decade, women own half the businesses in this country. This is the first generation of women to have full-time careers, and it's just moving on to be the most affluent and powerful generation of women in US history. And I think you would be well advised to look at the implications of this totally new phenomenon as we move toward the next millennium. And you know, a millennium can be a very powerful thing. The last time around in the 990s, as we approached the year 1000, 997, 998, 999, people went a little nuts. Most people thought that surely the world would end in the year 1000. And the priests in Europe were saying that, and the Pope was getting ready. In the year 999, the entire population of Iceland converted to Christianity. Now, you may not think there are very many people in Iceland in the year 999, 46,000, and they all got in just under the wire. Others writing at the time, especially French, thought that perhaps the year 1000 would usher in a golden era. Well, the Renaissance was several hundred years away, but they were at least pointed in the right direction. And we start our countdown for the next millennium, 1997, 1998. The year 2000 is going to have a powerful gravitational pull that will exaggerate everything we're doing, intensify, amplify everything we're doing. The 1990s will be just a fantastic decade. It's going to be the most exciting decade of our lives. I've said that we are living in the time of the parenthesis, the time between eras. We have not yet fully left the old industrial era, the old world order, but we're not yet fully up to speed in the new information, electronics, global era, the new world order. We're kind of a straddle of these eras in this time of the parenthesis, this time of transition. And the time of the parenthesis is a great and yeasty time. It's a time of great change and great uncertainty, and we must make uncertainty our friend. And it's a time, of course, of great opportunity. In stable eras, everything has a name and everything knows its place, and you and I can leverage very, very little. But in the time of the parenthesis, we have extraordinary leverage and influence, individually, professionally, and institutionally, if we can just get a clear sense, if we can just get a clear vision of the road ahead. And that's why I say, what a fantastic time to be alive. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. As you know, I've been asked to entertain, perhaps we can have some more light. I've been asked to entertain, perhaps even answer some questions. I usually ask that smokers go first because, as this audience well knows, they have less time. But I think, Don, given the spirit of the occasion, any questions, comments, challenges, stories? And there are microphones in the aisles. Perhaps some staff people could help. Yes, here's a question right here.
You mentioned that the industrial age is one of the past, information is one of the future. The industrial age had certain rules and disciplines. Just before you came on, there was a slideshow on chaos. In the future, with information as the coin, will there be a lack of rules, a lack of discipline, and possibly chaos, moral chaos?
Well, I think you'd have to judge for yourself, because we're more into the industrial era than we've virtually left behind the the manufacturing industrial era, because what we are manufacturing, and we are manufacturing more in the United States by far than we ever have, what we are manufacturing is being manufactured with information, with electronics, with including computers, robots, and so forth. So we already have a strong feeling, and your judgment